Jersey's next general election is June 22nd, 2022, and it's a fantastic opportunity for Islanders to vote in people who represent them, their views and their values for the next 4 years in the States Assembly. Before that happens, the States Assembly Diversity Forum has launched a campaign to try to encourage a more diverse range of candidates to come forward. They want you to know that there is support and information available to you if you're thinking about standing. And the most important message is that you could be one of the next States members. Well, to go through some of that support, I've got Mark Egan and Lisa Hart. You're Greffier and Deputy Greffier. What is a Greffier? What is your role?
So the Greffier is the clerk to the Parliament, so the States Assembly is the Parliament or the parliamentary body of Jersey. And the clerk means that I'm responsible for all the services that are provided to the states and to states members and to committees and panels.
And behind the scenes we give advice and guidance to states members and help them really with any of the work that they want to do as a states member.
Now we've mentioned kind of Parliament because people see the States Assembly as a Parliament, but there's differences, aren't there, between the States Assembly here and the UK Parliament?
Well, they're very different traditions, very different history. The States has 49 members, so it's much smaller than Parliament in the UK. But it's similar in the sense that it passes laws, passes legislation, and it debates the issues of interest to the islands. That is very similar to parliamentary bodies elsewhere.
Now, Lisa, I know June 22nd, 2022 sounds a long way off, but I guess there's a lot that needs to be done between now and the election.
Yes, one of the main things that we'll be working towards is ensuring that Islanders have a good knowledge of the changes that have been made to the landscape since the last elections. We've changed the electoral districts and there's been some changes to who the membership of the states are going to be beyond 2022. So it's really vital that we make sure that Islanders are comfortable with understanding those changes and know exactly what we expect of them when they come to vote.
So tell us a bit about those changes then, because we at the moment we have senators, they're gone effectively from now onwards. So
we'll have just two types of states members in the new system. We'll have the Connétables will remain with a strong link with their parishes, so each of them will still represent their parish. And instead of the 29 parish deputies, we're going to have 37 deputies who will represent 9 districts. So some parishes will have merged and will share their representation across several deputies.
And what criteria do you need to stand for election, and do you have to actually live in that district to stand for election?
Not necessarily. The only people that need to live in their particular parish are the parish Connétable. That's under the customary law. But anybody, if they are interested in standing for the states, can represent whichever district they feel they're best suited to.
Now, Mark, one of the other differences we're seeing with this election already is that there's quite a few new political parties or movements that are starting up. Is that going to change the way we vote and elect, do you think?
Well, we don't know is the honest answer. I think it probably will lead to some changes. It depends on how it develops. Obviously, we're used to seeing reformed Jersey. They stood at the last few elections and they campaign as a party. And so all of their candidates sign up to a common manifesto. We'll wait to see whether that's what happens with some of the other parties. And that could change the dynamic of the elections quite significantly. But I'm sure there'll also be quite a number of independents still who will have their own independent messages and campaign separately. So I think it will lead to changes, but it's quite hard to predict exactly how that's going to look.
Now, in your experience, why is it, do you think, that people stand for election in Jersey?
Well, in my experience, people stand for election because they really want to make a difference in their communities. They will have strong views about how things are done in Jersey. Quite often they want to see change, or they want to support certain things which they think are under threat. And they come forward because they feel that they've got the time and the skills to bring to the Assembly. And states members, by and large, are very community-minded and they want to make a difference to their island.
Now, it must be pretty overwhelming to wake up the next morning after election, find that you've been voted in and suddenly you're a states member. Does the support that you provide stop there, or is there support for people as they wake up and work out what on earth do I do next?
No, there's a lot of support to people who wake up and suddenly find that they're members of the States. That's the whole point of my team. That's what we're there for. We support all members individually, and we will be there from day one to help them with very practical things like getting onto the payroll and finding out, how to get their IT allowance so they can get the right sort of equipment to work in the States, through to all the knowledge they need about how the States works and propositions and questions. We provide a whole range of support, research support, sometimes even pastoral support. We listen to members and help them with whatever problems they might bring to us. So very much we're there to support them from day one.
It's really important that folk know that we're essentially their department, and all of our staff are ready to support them in their work as a States member.
Okay, so we're going to have these two different States members, Connétable, Constable and the Deputies. Lisa, what are the differences between those roles? What could you expect if you got elected to one or the other?
I guess the main difference between the two is that the Connétables outside of the States Assembly have another job to do within their particular parishes, and obviously they'd be supported in that work by the parish authorities within their particular parish. But once they're in the States, there really is no difference between deputies and constables in the work that they do as a States member. All of them will be expected to attend the States meetings. All of them can be elected to be members of the executive on the Council of Ministers, or indeed work within scrutiny. So once they're a States member, really the only difference is what they do outside of the States.
So can you give us a kind of an idea of what it's like to be a States member on a daily basis? We kind of only see them in the States Chamber, in debates and things like that, or perhaps in our own parishes. So what's a kind of a day in the life of a deputy, let's say?
I think it's incredibly varied work. I think a lot of people are under the misapprehension that the only time States members are working is once every 3 weeks when they're in the States Chamber. But that's just really the tip of the iceberg. Behind the scenes, they do a lot of constituency work, so supporting the people in their parishes with whatever it is that they need assistance with. They can be a minister or an assistant minister, in which case they're attending meetings within their departments that they're working for, and also Council of Ministers meetings. They can be on scrutiny, either as scrutiny chairs or members of panels, working on reviewing the decisions made by ministers and their departments. So it's an incredibly full and varied role, and a lot goes on behind the scenes that the public are perhaps not 100% aware of.
I was going to add to that, actually. When you see a proposition brought forward, or even a question brought forward in the States, there will have been hours and hours of work before that to get to that point, often involving our staff. So for any proposition, for example, members will engage a considerable amount of time with government ministers and with departments to understand the implications of what they're putting forward, perhaps try and find out what the financial implications are. They'll do research, they'll work with our team on research, they might be getting international comparisons. All of that goes on behind the scenes. You don't see it at all. What you'll see is the debate on the proposition, but as Lisa very rightly put it, it's the tip of the iceberg. You can't get to that point without an awful lot of work in advance.
Now, that's one of the things to cover here, because we're talking about diversity. Now, there may be somebody who's sinking or standing who's got small children, or perhaps they're a carer of another family member. Is the workload such a huge amount that people simply can't get on with the rest of their lives, or is it doable?
I think it's doable. I think particularly over the last 18 months, we've seen that there's a greater deal of flexibility in the way that people work. And certainly the States is no exception. We've had hybrid meetings and virtual meetings so that people have been able to attend and participate in States Assembly meetings, even though they're based at home. I think for somebody with a young family or with caring responsibilities, there is a degree of flexibility that goes with the work. It's not a 9 to 5. They themselves will need to obviously be flexible and expect that they may have to work outside of the normal day hours in order to be able to fulfill all their responsibilities. But we certainly do have already some members who are parents of young children, and and others with care responsibilities, and they are able to still fully fulfil their roles.
Now, Mark, we talked about that moment waking up when you've won and the shock the next morning. What about the candidates that wake up and they haven't won? Can people who've sort of invested a lot in a campaign still be involved somehow?
Yeah, I think there are opportunities to get involved in political life, even if you're not a member of the state. So one thing that we've introduced in recent years is e-petitions, and they can be brought forward in order to gather support for particular ideas, which would be, in effect, propositions that could be debated by the state. And there is a link there that they can be debated by the states. And we've got some good examples of initiatives which have happened as a result of e-petitions, not least the first e-petition, which was around compensation for people who suffer from illnesses connected to asbestos. That scheme was introduced really on the back of that e-petition. And I'd also flag up the scrutiny system is always on the lookout for people's views on different subjects, the different subjects they look at. So we did a review recently on maternity services, for example, in the island, and an enormous number of women who'd been involved with maternity services over the last few years contributed to that review and talked about their experiences. And it led to a very hard-hitting report, which I'm sure will drive change in that area. And that's the sort of thing we need to publicise those things to make sure that people know how to get involved. But those are the kinds of ways in which people can get involved. And of course, if you're a community leader and you're thinking about standing for the states, you can use these sorts of ways to put your views across to the states to help build your profile as well. It can be a two-way thing.
And there are also several states bodies where lay people, so unelected members, are part of those bodies as well. So people can still participate even if they're not successful in getting elected next year.
Okay, so if I'm thinking of standing for election, I'm not, by the way, if I am, what do I need to do? What do I need to do to go forward?
The plan you need to have really is about your self-publicity. So you need to obviously put together a manifesto with the ideas that you have for improving things within the island.
That in itself kind of might frighten some people. Is there support available for that?
Well, I think we are at the moment putting together a package of support for potential candidates, and one of the things we had thought about, and we've been asking potential candidates themselves what they'd like support with, is support in how to write a manifesto. We're not here to give people ideas as to what their policy should be, but I think one way we can help is by helping people express those ideas in a sort of good English, but also in a sensible way. So if you want to stand for election on the basis that you personally are going to build 10,000 houses in the island, or you personally are going to change the island's climate, then I think there are probably better ways of expressing your aspirations, because those are going to be quite unrealistic for an individual states member to achieve. So we do want to offer that support in terms of what a good manifesto looks like. But obviously it has to come from the candidates. What do they actually stand for? What are their values?
But it's just a kind of putting it together, which you'll be providing support. And I believe there's going to be another video as well that will help people with that.
And there's also will be an array of advice on vote.je, which is the website where people can go to find out all about election matters, whether they're wanting to stand as a candidate or simply vote, to get the background information about candidates. So we would help promote candidates by having a section on each of them there, so that the members of the public can come onto that and see who it is who's standing. So it helps with the promotion. What else are we going to be doing? There's a whole heap of initiatives that we've got lined up to support potential candidates, to help get their messages out, so that we provide an even playing field for all candidates. I guess one of the other things you would need to be minded of if you were standing for election is the amount of money that you were potentially going to spend on your campaign, because there is a limit, so that there is that playing field that I mentioned earlier, so that everybody has the same opportunities, and it isn't a case of those with a lot of money are able to ensure that they get elected because they're able to promote themselves more widely. And
can you get elected with virtually no budget? I mean, if you're somebody who's on a low income, you might be standing on that platform. Is that a barrier?
Yeah, I don't really think that the slickness of your campaign is necessarily what counts with the public. I think the public are looking for genuine, authentic people whose messages are heartfelt, who they feel their opinions resonate with their own, somebody who they recognise could represent their views in the assembly. And I think from that perspective, it doesn't matter whether you come from a very wealthy background or you actually are somebody who's struggling with some of the things that those people may identify themselves with. In fact, that may well be a positive for some people.
So not glossy pamphlets are not needed, it's more
it's the
about
message,
what you
really.
stand for, yeah. And so there's also a form to fill in and you have to get people to nominate you, is that right?
Yep, the nomination process has been changed slightly, really just to make sure that no one falls by the wayside, so that there's a larger amount of checking that's going to be done to ensure that those people who are nominating candidates are eligible in themselves to do that job. Basically, you need 10 people who are willing to back you, to say that they think that you would be a good representative for them, who live in your district that in which you're standing.
Right, okay. And this, what's the deadline for?
That's going to be in May. The nominations are due to open from after Liberation Day.
Okay. Now, Mark, this is the first time running a diversity campaign. What are your kind of hopes and aspirations for this?
My hope is that we have a larger number of candidates stands than has previously been the case, and that we have more competitive elections. More competitive elections means candidates will work harder, to be frank, at getting the vote out, and that will drive up turnout, and that will lead to a more vibrant democracy at the end of the day. I think as well the Assembly needs to better reflect the population of the island than it does at the moment. So a broader spread in all sorts of different ways of candidates. So we talk about gender sometimes, but I think the age profile as well, the background of candidates in terms of where they come from, but also just the background in terms of socio-economic background, for example. We could do with a broader spread, and that better reflecting the island will, in my view, help generate better decisions going forward and a more identification of the island with the Assembly than perhaps there is the case.
If you see someone who looks like you representing you in the Assembly, then you have that connection, then you feel as if it is you being represented. So that's very important.
We see that with certain members who are closely associated with particular groups in the island, and they are overwhelmed with work from all of those people, because people see them and think, oh, that's my person in the Assembly. Well, you know, we need to see that across the board, really.
I mean, there are some people who may be thinking about standing for election who, for them, English is a second language, and that might cause a confidence crisis. Is that an issue?
It shouldn't be, and we've got a couple of states members at the moment where that applies. You know, obviously you are needing to communicate, and that's fundamental in being a states member, because you're a politician and words are your business. But any advice that and support we can give, we will do. So providing people are able to communicate in English, there's no reason why they can't stand and play an important role in representing those who perhaps don't have English as a first language within the Assembly.
And what about, obviously we haven't covered disability either. I mean, will you provide support to people if they have a disability?
Yes, we have had conversations with candidates in the past who have come to us to talk about their disabilities and how we might be able to make adjustments in the Assembly. I think it has to be very much focused around the individual, because there's no such thing as a disabled person. Everyone's disability is different in some way. The principle on which Lisa and I work will be that if you're elected, you have a right to sit there and to make your contribution, and we will find whatever adaptations are necessary to make that happen. So we're very much open to conversations with candidates or potential candidates who are disabled to talk about, well, how would it work for them?
Okay, so what would you say to somebody who's thinking about standing for election?
Well, I would encourage them to look at all the material, to talk to their friends and the people they trust, and to not be afraid to put themselves forward because of any of these practical considerations, and to think about, you know, the islands and the contribution that they can make to the island over 4 years, and not to. Sometimes people think that there's so much information they can't read it all. They can't understand every problem. They can't speak in a debate as well as other people because of whatever. And I just don't think that should hold people back. The fact is, nobody can read and understand every single thing that comes before the states. But that doesn't stop people from making a really important contribution, particularly on the subjects that are closest to them, whether it's to do with their parish or locality, or whether it's to do with the background of the industry they've worked in, or whatever it is. People have got that contribution to make. They should definitely be prepared to step up and make it.
Oftentimes when talking to people, particularly in the run-up to the election, given the job that we do, you'll be having what is a political conversation and say to somebody, have you thought of standing? Oh no, I couldn't possibly. I'm not that sort of person. Of course you are, because actually you're exactly the sort of person we want. If you've got lots of ideas, if you are politically interested in what happens in the island, and let's face it, politics affects every aspect of our life in Jersey. If you've got views, if you've got opinions, and if you've got a passion for the island, then you're perfect for the States. And all the rest of it, we can provide the assistance and support for. We can help people grow into being States members. They don't come fully formed. But you know, what shouldn't stop people is the idea that they're not the right fit. Everyone's the right fit. You just need to put yourself out there.
Absolutely. And last thing then, some top tips, and where do people get all this information from?
Well, vote.je, as I've mentioned before, is really the main place to go if you're looking for information about all things election related, from whether you can vote to whether you are eligible to stand, to how you go about standing, and the information for candidates. So anybody who is interested, I urge them to look at vote.je. Over the next few months, there'll be lots of new things going up on there, particularly to help and support new people coming forward.
I think my top tip is for people to be authentic in what they do. So in terms of how they put themselves across in any leaflets and manifestos, in terms of when they're out on the doorstep talking to people, when they're at hustings, and indeed when they get into the States, is not carrying on from the last answer, really, not to think that they have to put on a persona as a States member. Just be themselves. Actually, that's what people like. People like authentic people. They relate to authentic people. It's more successful. But you know, that's what we need. That's what the island needs. It's what the Assembly needs, is people being themselves, bringing themselves into the Assembly, their concerns, their passions, as Lisa mentioned. And that's the way to success, in my view.
And that's a fantastic way to end, because that's exactly what we need. Thank you very much, Mark and Lisa.